Since the beginning of my photography journey, every day I strive to create better images and strong narrative projects. With these goals in mind, I was working extremely hard in the beginning to upgrade my gear. The online narrative had convinced me that upgrading my sensor size was the key to becoming a professional photographer. So that's what I did. I took the journey from APS-C to full frame and eventually all the way to medium formats. And although the gear was great and it did make me look a little more professional, it was definitely slowing me down. And by that, I mean I was just taking less photos because the file size was so large and the cameras were just a lot slower in general. So when I made this realization that I was shooting less, I decided to take the journey backwards. And for the first time ever, I have entered the micro four thirds world. So I introduced to you what has been my everyday camera for the past couple of months, OM system OM-3. Throughout the journey of all the gear that I've been on, this camera has convinced me that shooting more is truly what makes me a better photographer. And before we continue on in this video, I do want to say that this video is sponsored by OM System. They did send me this camera to test out, but they do not have any control in what I say. They're not forcing me to say anything, and this review is all my own thoughts. But without further ado, let's talk about OM-3. I was really inspired by the vintage design of this camera, which is based off the OM-1 film camera body. The pleasing thing about this camera is the fact that it doesn't just look like the OM-1 film camera, it actually feels like it. It has this very slim build and it's made of metal and it's a very durable finish. And despite having this vintage inspired design and being made of metal, the camera actually is less than 500 grams and has an IP53 rating. At first, I didn't really think too much about the IP53 rating, but upon learning more about it and knowing that it's freeze-proof, dust-proof, and splash-proof, it made me realize how many cameras just can't say that. So because of the build quality and the IP53 rating, I've just gained so much confidence in using this camera body. And even though I've been beating it up over the past couple of months, it has no dings or scratches anywhere in sight, and it's been performing extremely well. So if you've never actually shot micro four thirds like myself until this point, the lenses might be a little confusing. But luckily, the math isn't too hard on them. All you need to know is that whatever the micro four thirds lens is, you just have to multiply that millimeter by 2, and then you get your full frame equivalent. So for instance, this is a 17 millimeter lens on this camera. You multiply it by 2 to get 34, which means this is approximately a 35 millimeter lens. And one big benefit of the smaller sensor is actually the fact that the lenses can be a lot smaller. This is an f1.8 aperture lens, but as you can see, because it only has to cover that small sensor, this lens is tiny. So because this kit is so small but goes down to f1.8, I found that this is actually a great way to do some night and blue hour photography without having to carry a huge kit around. Next up, I want to talk about some of my standout features that I've discovered on the OM-3 after the past couple months of using it. So the first thing is, while you've been looking at this camera throughout this video, you might have noticed that it does have a flat design and it might not appear to be too customizable. But that's actually exactly the opposite. I found that this camera is extremely customizable. There's actually this lever that has a 1 and a 2. This is what OM System calls the function lever, and this can have multiple purposes. I know some people use this to change their focus mode, but for me, when I change from 1 to 2, it actually changes what these top dials on the camera are going to do. When I have the focus lever in position 1, I can change my aperture and my exposure compensation on these top dials. But when I change it to position 2, I can then change my ISO and my white balance on these dials. So within a quick switch, I essentially have 4 different dials that I can access. So that's become extremely handy for me because I'll usually just set up my ISO and white balance at the beginning of a shoot and then switch the lever to aperture and exposure compensation, which is something that I'm going to have to change between each photo. Now, the next thing that makes this camera so customizable is actually what's inside of that focus lever, which is that computational photography button. When you push in this button, plus rotate the dial, it's going to switch between different computational photography modes. Some of the modes are extremely interesting, like the ND and the GND. And the GND is a graduated ND, which I have honestly never seen in any camera before, and this feature alone is extremely shocking. Essentially, lower the exposure of your sky while having the same exposure of your foreground, and you could get a much more well-balanced exposure straight out of the camera. And there's a ton more computational photography options that I didn't even get to use. So diving into the more technical side of things, the OM-3 is supposed to sit somewhere between the OM-5 Mark II, the more beginner camera from OM System, and the OM-1 which is supposed to be the flagship from OM System. The awesome thing about OM-3 is it actually has all of the power of the OM-1 packed into this vintage-inspired design. So that means that this camera hasn't been crippled at all by OM System. They've put everything into this camera. This is actually the first camera that I've used that has a fully stacked sensor. And to be specific, it has a 20 megapixel fully stacked backside illuminated sensor with a TruePic X processor. The fully stacked sensor means that this camera has insane readout speeds, which means that this camera is snappy, it's fast, and it is processing pictures at a rate that not many other cameras can do. The other specs that are really important to me about this camera is that it has 5 stops of in-body image stabilization, which paired up with a small sensor honestly makes it so you could handheld in the middle of the night, which is just completely crazy. And this has 6 frames of mechanical burst shoot-in, which is very good because I find that that's kind of a sweet spot for me in terms of I want to capture the moments, but I don't want to have too many photos to go through in just a 1-second time span. Now, one concern that you might have and that I definitely had was, okay, this is a small camera, which means probably has a small battery, probably doesn't have good battery life, right? But honestly, for me, that was completely wrong. Despite this camera having some specs that may seem like it would draw a lot of power, I took this camera out all day and I did not run out of battery. And that was also while shooting JPEG plus RAW to the camera. Your mileage may obviously vary depending on how you use your camera, but for me, this camera lasted way longer than other cameras that I have would have. I would have had to switch out 1 to 2 batteries depending on which camera I was taking out, but for the OM-3, it lasted all day. Now the creative dial is the one button on the front of the camera that isn't the lens release, so that means that it's pretty important. The creative dial is OM System's solution to color profiles and straight out of camera JPEGs. If you start all the way on the left of this creative dial, at least from when I'm looking down on it, you have this CRT mode, and this allows you to add a color overlay to the image that you're taking. This was probably my least used creative function on this camera. Moving over to the next function is the art function, and this is definitely the most interesting one for me. The art function has 16 distinct looks that you can cycle through to basically get a straight out of camera JPEG that's gonna have a very interesting look. And these looks can range from pop art to instant film. Really, there's a ton of different options and it's very cool. It's super awesome if you're someone that does want to use this camera for JPEGs. You have tons of profiles to choose from to get a cool look. And then if you move over once again, you're gonna be in the mode that I'm most commonly using, which is right in the middle. And this is best for your straight out of camera RAWs. This is gonna add none of the creative styles or colors to the camera. It's just gonna give you the raw photo. Moving over once again, that takes us to the color profile on this. And for OM System, you have 4 color profiles that you can choose from, and then you have a wide variety of options to choose to edit it. In the color mode, you actually get a color wheel where you could change the saturation of certain colors in the image, and you also have a tone curve and other options to enhance your JPEG photo. This is a way you can definitely craft recipes inside of this camera, and as I use it more throughout the year, I'll definitely be creating and tweaking my own recipes to share for you guys. And if you move all the way over to the right of this camera, you can actually put it into mono mode, and mono mode allows you to take the black and white JPEGs straight out of camera. This also gives you the ability to edit your black and white photos based off a tone curve, color overlay, and grain effect. No matter what, I'm always going to be shooting raw photos in my cameras, but I will be using these creative dials more to create recipes to share. I find that between the creative dial and the function lever, this camera is able to be set up just in such a fun way for me, and I've really enjoyed using it. And honestly, there's just a ton more features inside of this camera that I didn't get to test. For example, this camera shoots awesome video, shoots 422 10-bit footage, and then there's obviously the S&Q mode, the silent mode, all the bracketing options, but this is not something that I usually use in my typical workflow, so it's not something that I'm gonna review, but all of that is packed into this camera. All right, and now for the part of the video that everyone loves, the criticisms of the camera. So the first thing that I think we can all agree on is that this camera is no doubt a little expensive. It's about $2,000 USD for the body. And then if you want to throw on this lens, the 17mm that I have on, it's about $550 extra USD. At first, I really did not like the price price of this camera, but I guess I'm starting to come around to it a little bit. But as it is, all cameras on the market are extremely expensive tools. On top of that, I understand that there's a ton of better value deals out on the market. You could get a full frame camera, you could get an APS-C camera. You probably can't get a medium format camera unless it's used, but you can definitely get a value deal out there for the same price that this camera would cost. But honestly, the way that I'm looking at it right now is that if I break down my cameras as a price per photo, this camera would be one of the cheapest cameras that I own. This camera is responsible for my most photo intense day this year, which was about 2,000 photos at Coney Island. So when I compare that to other cameras that have cost me less and I've not shot with them, the dollar per photo is a lot less, and it's really not a value deal if I'm not using the gear that much. My other criticism of the camera is the untapped potential of the creative dial. I think what OM system has got going on here is extremely impressive to start. However, it seems like there could be firmware updates that can make this a lot better. For instance, the black and white mono profile has a grain effect. I'd love to see that in the color profile too. It'd be something that I'd love to put on my color photos. Plus, they allow you to manipulate all of the color channels in terms of saturation. If it's possible to do hue or luminance, this could literally be a game changer for me. I might not even have to edit if they allow me to tweak my colors inside the camera that much. I'm gonna criticize the screen. There's nothing really too wrong with it. It's a relatively bright screen. I do like that it flips out this way, but as we're getting into the really expensive territory with these cameras, and we've seen other camera brands do these very free angle screens, I'd like to see a screen that both rotates this way and can rotate out in the normal way if I want it to be more of a photo camera. And honestly, that's all the criticisms that I have of the camera so far. So the OM system, OM-3, has quickly become a very memorable camera to me. It's the first micro four thirds camera that I'm using, and it's definitely opened my eyes to the benefits of the system. If you had asked me a couple years ago, I would have said we might as well get rid of micro four thirds and honestly throw APS-C into there as well. Let's just go full frame and medium format. But I've truly had a 180 in the way that I'm viewing things. The enjoyability that you get from a camera and the amount that you shoot with it is way more important. I'm really excited for the future of OM system cameras. I really think that they nailed the design, portability, functionality, and most importantly, the durability of this camera into one. Photography might have become my job, but at the end of the day, I really just want to have fun with photography. It is something that's really brought the joy of photography back to me. Like I said, I don't know if it's the nostalgia or if it's the sound of that mechanical shutter, but there's something about this camera that's special, and the images honestly are just so great too. So at the end of the day, the thing that I want you to think about with the OM-3 is that if this will bring you joy and cause you to shoot more photos, this is the camera for you.